All right, so we've talked about Space Force. Let's talk about a more recent controversy, which is Neil Young versus Joe Rogan. So, for those of you out there who might not be aware of this, Chris, can you tell people who Neil Young is? I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who have no idea who Neil Young is.
Do you think so? Really?
Yeah.
Well, okay, yeah. Neil Young was one of the legends of rock going back to the 1960s, both as a member of multiple like chart-topping bands and as a solo artist. Yep, keep on rocking in the free world. You probably, if you're of a certain age that is around Kadish and myself, you probably remember him on stage performing that with Pearl Jam at I think the MTV Video Music Awards. Um, has been, like a lot of rockers from the 60s, outspoken politically throughout his career. And, without diving into the political morass of 2022 too deeply, whatever you thought you knew about the political spectrum, to the extent that still even exists in this country, you can have stayed pretty much the same in your beliefs over a set period of time and moved around on that spectrum a lot, or you may self-identify as being on one or the other side of the spectrum, and that's as a result caused you to totally trash beliefs you held previously
Yeah.
and
I
adopt
mean,
the total opposite in order to stay in one part of the Venn diagram.
yeah, I mean, one of the funny things about Neil Young is that he was like the quintessential 60s counterculture icon, right? Where he was like, screw authority,
You're
screw
picking up what I'm
capitalism.
putting down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
screw capitalism, screw the man. I want to be a hippie. I want to smoke weed. I want to do my own thing. And, he was very anti establishment. He was kind of like the poster boy for anti establishment
He
rock and
was
rollers.
correctly, in my mind, an outspoken proponent of free speech
Yeah.
during the George W. Bush years. Like you mentioned, for anybody who's been on the stream with us, and thanks to anybody who's spending any amount of their time with us, I really appreciate it. But if you've been on the stream since the beginning, you heard Matt and I talk about our days as film majors at Penn State. He stuck it out. I bitched out and finished as a journalism major. So I am like a radical First Amendment stan. And so I was very much in the Neil Young camp in terms of radical defense of our First Amendment rights, which I think are one of the one of the very greatest things about this country. One of my professors at Penn State, journalism professors who spent a lot of time teaching over in China, said he would be asked by Chinese students what makes the West and what makes the United States specifically so great. And he said, my first answer is the First Amendment. And not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of it, Matt, which is encouraging the marketplace of ideas. That used to be Neil Young's thing back in the day.
Yep. And now with the disease that shall not be named, he kind of is actually very much in line with the establishment, where he's like for mask mandates, he's for vaccine mandates, he's very much like the coof is a plague, and we all have to surrender our freedoms to the government in order to survive it. And so what he did was he called on Spotify to remove Joe Rogan's podcast for the spread of misinformation. And he was like, it's either me or Joe Rogan. You choose. And then he had his lawyers from Warner Records send Spotify a cease and desist. And they were like, you either take down Rogan stuff or you take down Neil Young stuff. And Spotify was like, let me check my stats real quick. So like they look at their stats and they're like, Joe Rogan's podcast gets 200 million downloads per month. Neil Young's music gets 6.6 million monthly listens on Spotify. Bye-bye, Neil Young. And so like they took down Neil Young's music, and Neil Young basically lost 60% of his worldwide streaming income due to this move. And Spotify said like, hey, if he ever wants to come back, more than happy to have him, but we're going to stick with Joe Rogan. And so Neil Young's gambit here kind of backfired. I think he thought he was more important than he really was. But
Yeah,
it
well,
was,
look, clearly, like Neil Young is a delusional buffoon for imagining that he had the political clout to bully Joe Rogan out of, off his platform, or bully Spotify into breaking a $100 million contract that they have with Rogan. But set aside the stupidity of an old man who imagines himself to be far more important and influential than he is. To me, it's just so offensive to my sensibilities that this guy who once fashioned himself a firebrand in the name of defying the establishment and encouraging free speech now sees the solution to a problem is that this lifelong leftists solution is, I am going to turn to a multinational corporation and ask them to censor the largest independent media voice in the world because I don't like one thing that someone told me was on his platform. I guarantee you, Neil Young probably never even listened to the episode that has everybody pissed off, which is like a fraction of all the content Joe Rogan's produced over the course of his show. And if you don't like it, then I'm going to, imagine that I can threaten you with taking my toys and go home. It's outrageous. And look, again, I don't care what you think about COVID mitigation measures or the vaccine or masks or any of that shit. I don't want to wade down into that quagmire. But the whole point that here was somebody who was vociferously pushing back against the post 9/11 security state mentality that was prevalent in society and in government during the 2000s, now doesn't understand that the same principles he was fighting for in that era still apply today. Like, this is not the American way to just find something you don't like and then appeal to some gigantic private corporation and say, can you please shut this off so that no one can have access to it? Like, that impulse to destroy and censor the marketplace of ideas, to me, is abhorrent. So, look, Neil Young is long past his day. He can sit and spin. I've no sympathy for him at all whatsoever.
well, the crazy thing is like Neil Young's just a small part of this. Like, he's just the most recent thing where,
Right.
like, Joe Rogan has been targeted for cancellation by CNN. He's been targeted for cancellation by, basically the left for having the gall to question the narrative, right?
Yep.
And he's just fearless. Like, he's had people on who have been censored and banned everywhere else, and he's getting their message out. And heaven forbid people should hear everything and then make up their own minds about it. But it's misinformation or disinformation because it goes against what the people in charge personally believe, and it's very weird. CNN has done some really deceptive stuff to try to make Joe Rogan out to look like a crackpot, to look like was it Alex Jones 2.0?
Yeah.
Right. Like when Joe Rogan got COVID, they actually made him look gray and pasty when they replayed his video announcing that he got COVID on CNN. Yep. They tried to make him look sicker than he was because, like, he was taking these alternative treatments that actually, helped him get over it really quick. And it was probably the Delta variant that he got. So
look, if you were suspicious of Patriot Act security state measures, of torture camps, of never-ending foreign wars, or any of the other excesses of American foreign policy during the 2000s, you have to be cognizant on some level of the dangers of allowing corporate-controlled traditional mass media to control the choke points of information. So you need to ask yourself whether or not that is a desirable alternative to Rogan's model, which is truly to open up the marketplace and allow for freer discourse which is going to mean some craziness sneaks in there. There is going to be some static in the system. And you know what? I have listened to hours and hours and hours of Rogan's podcast. And I have not become a lunatic. I have not adopted belief in any crazy conspiracy theories. And if I'm being honest, my position on certain aspects of American domestic policy have probably moved towards the center or the left as a result of hearing them contextualized by his guests. And so I think that's another important point, that the loudest critics of Rogan are they lose all credibility with people who listen to the show regularly, because their lack of familiarity with what he does is self-evident. And then you realize, oh, this person who is critiquing this thing doesn't really know anything about it or understand it, which then leads me to question what their motives are in trying to get me or anyone else to not even have the option of listening to what this guy's guests have to say, which most of the time is about stand-up comedy and like killing elk.
Well, also, one of the funny things about this is that Joe Rogan is not a right winger. You know, he voted for Obama. He was a Bernie supporter during the elections. You know, he's a guy who is big on, you know, recreational drugs like marijuana. But he's you know, he's a threat to the establishment media, because if you think about how many people are in the United States, 350 million or so, yep. He gets 200 million downloads on his podcast every month. Like, that is crazy. That is over half of the population of the United States listens to his podcast. And because of that, you know, he's not someone who can be controlled by, you know, the media establishment, and they can't make him toe the narrative, because he's a free thinker. He thinks for himself. He has on the people he wants to talk to. He talks about the stuff that interests him, and his listeners know him. And so, like, these attempts to gaslight people about, like, you know, him being like a alt-righter, or, you know, someone who's spreading disinformation or something like that, that just doesn't jive with the Joe Rogan that his listeners know.
Yeah, it doesn't hit.
And I think that was the same issue that they had with Rush Limbaugh, where, you know, Rush's audience kind of like knew him and trusted him. And so every time they came out to attack him, you know, his audience didn't shrink, because they're like, well, we know that's a lie. And you can see a lot of alt media people like Tim Pool and all these other guys who are doing their own thing and actually trying to be truthful in their reporting and show both sides and fair and balanced and stuff like that. And exposing the gaslighting, exposing the lies, and at least like giving people like an alternative to think about, you know, and letting them and respecting them enough to make up their own minds. Whereas like something like this, and every time it fails, and it seems to fail more spectacularly. Like, I don't think Neil Young genuinely thought that Spotify would choose him over Joe.
Right.
In a way, it was almost like a publicity stunt, I think. But at the same time, like, he's losing 60% of his streaming revenue. I don't know how much that was for him, but
I think Neil's going to be okay. I think he could lose 100% of his streaming revenue into perpetuity, and he would not be worrying about the price of gas and groceries, is my guess about Neil Young. And again, just to, you know, which is why, again, like, to be lectured to and condescended by these people is just so preposterous. One of the other things that I like about Rogan is, you know, he brings, this is has almost become a buzzword, but he brings an authenticity to what he does, and there's a humility and an honesty. He's self-critical. He admits and reflects on mistakes when he makes them. And one thing I have learned doing long form podcast, which as much as I like doing the TV show that I do, the longest segment we have in an hour long TV show is 8 minutes. When we get to sit down and really dig into a college football topic, whether we're interviewing a guy who played for Penn State, or we're talking about like the economics of the sport or the politics of it or whatever, we can go for 2 hours and we can really get into it. If your audience spends that amount of time with you, when they run into you out in public, it's not just that like they think they know you, they do know you. Because if you're behind the mic for that long and you're talking that consistently, you can't act that much. Your authentic self comes out. Now, my wife and I spend a lot of time trying to get my in-laws and my mom, get our parents off of cable news, 24/7 cable news. So I am exposed to very little, but still way more Fox News, CNN, and MSNBC than I would like in my life. And even that is enough for me to know that to call that junk food for your brain and your soul would be to insult junk food and its health benefits for your body. And the long form interrogative humble form of conversations that happen in front of hundreds of millions of people on Rogan's show is so antithetical to this totally useless, corrosive form of quote unquote news that is fed to us by the cable news networks. It's no shock that they want to try to destroy the guy because he's not just a threat to their bottom line, he's an existential threat to their entire model of operation and their ability to use your term, gaslight their audience.
Yeah, did you hear that after their airport contract ran out, CNN's ratings dropped 90%?
Yeah, which is encouraging to me. Turn off cable news. It's garbage. Read a book, meditate.